When security dragged Gabrielle out of the five-star restaurant for not belonging, the entire dining room erupted in applause. What they didn't know was that she owned the building, the restaurant chain, and half the city block. In 60 seconds, their cruel laughter would turn to stunned silence. The autumn rain had been relentless that Tuesday evening in Manhattan, turning the city streets into rivers of neon reflections. Gabrielle Thompson pulled her hood down as she stepped through the heavy glass doors of Le Chateau, one of the most exclusive French restaurants in the Upper East Side. Water dripped from her simple navy sweater and well-worn jeans as she approached the marble reception desk, her sneakers squeaking slightly against the polished floor. The maitre d', a thin man with a carefully waxed mustache, looked up from his reservation book with barely concealed disdain. His eyes swept over Gabrielle's casual attire with the precision of a scanner, cataloging every perceived flaw. "I'm sorry, miss, but we're fully booked this evening," he said without even asking for her name. Gabrielle smiled patiently, tucking a strand of her natural hair behind her ear. "I have a reservation under Thompson Industries for 8 o'clock." The man's expression didn't change as he made a show of scanning his book. "I don't see anything here." "Perhaps you're thinking of a different establishment. There's a lovely diner about 6 blocks south that might be more appropriate." The word hung in the air like smoke, its implications clear to everyone within earshot. A woman at a nearby table whispered something to her companion, and they both turned to stare. Gabrielle felt the familiar weight of judgment settling on her shoulders, but she maintained her composure. "Could you please check again? The reservation was made last week for a business dinner." "Look, sweetheart," the maitre d' said, his voice rising just enough to draw more attention. "I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't the kind of place where you just walk in off the street. Maybe try calling next time and they can explain the dress code to you." From across the dining room, Preston Whitmore had been watching the exchange with growing amusement. A real estate mogul with more money than sense and an ego to match, Preston was the type of man who believed his wealth gave him the right to judge everyone around him. He dabbed his mouth with his napkin and stood up, his voice carrying across the restaurant. "Is there a problem here?" Preston asked, approaching with the swagger of someone who owned the world. His perfectly tailored suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Because if some people can't understand what kind of establishment this is, maybe someone should explain it to them. Other diners began to take notice now, conversations dying as the drama unfolded. Phone cameras discreetly appeared, recording what was quickly becoming a spectacle. Gabrielle felt the heat of embarrassment creeping up her neck, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm simply trying to keep my dinner reservation." "There seems to be some confusion." Preston laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Confusion? The only confusion here is how you thought you could just waltz into Le Chateau dressed like you're going to clean someone's house." The crowd of wealthy diners tittered with cruel laughter, feeding off Preston's cruelty like wolves scenting blood. "Some people just don't understand what class means," Preston continued, playing to his audience. "They see a fancy place and think they can just demand a table. This isn't McDonald's, honey." Gabrielle's hands clenched slightly at her sides, but her voice remained calm. "I understand this is an upscale restaurant. That's exactly why I made a reservation 3 weeks in advance." The restaurant manager, a nervous-looking man named Philippe, had emerged from the back office at the sound of the commotion. He took one look at the situation and immediately sided with his paying customers. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're disrupting our other guests." "I haven't disrupted anyone," Gabrielle replied quietly. "I've simply asked to be seated at my reserved table." "What reservation?" Philippe spread his hands theatrically. "We have no record of any reservation under your name, and frankly, even if we did, we maintain certain standards here." The crowd was growing larger now, other diners abandoning their meals to watch the unfolding drama. Someone had started live streaming on social media, and cruel hashtags were already beginning to trend. Gabrielle could hear the whispered comments, the barely contained laughter, the phone cameras capturing every moment of her humiliation. Security, Philippe called, and two large men in dark suits appeared as if from nowhere. Please escort this woman from the premises. As the security guards approached, Gabrielle noticed something that made her heart ache more than her own humiliation. A young black server named Jamal was standing near the kitchen doors, watching the scene unfold with obvious distress. She recognized the look in his eyes, the same mixture of shame, anger, and helplessness that she had felt countless times in her own journey. The security guards reached for Gabrielle's arms, but she stepped back gracefully. "I'll leave voluntarily," she said with quiet dignity. "But first I'd like to speak with the owner." Preston burst into fresh laughter. "The owner? Lady, the owner doesn't waste time with people like you. He's probably at home in his penthouse, counting his money and not worrying about random people who think they deserve special treatment." Philippe nodded eagerly. Mr. Beaumont is far too busy to deal with this kind of disruption. As Gabrielle moved toward the exit, she passed Jamal, who was being berated by the headwaiter for standing idle during the commotion. Without hesitation, she stopped and pulled a crisp $100 bill from her wallet, then added four more. "This is for you," she said quietly to Jamal, pressing the money into his surprised hands. "You deserve to be treated with respect, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The young man's eyes widened in shock. $500 was more than he made in a week. "Miss, I can't—" "Yes, you can," Gabrielle said firmly. "And remember, your worth isn't determined by other people's prejudices." As she continued toward the door, she noticed an elderly woman at a corner table who seemed to be having trouble breathing. While the woman's dining companions looked on in panic and other guests simply stared, Gabrielle immediately rushed over. "Are you choking?" she asked, and when the woman nodded frantically, Gabrielle positioned herself behind the chair and performed the Heimlich maneuver with practiced efficiency. After 3 compressions, a piece of bread dislodged from the woman's throat, and she gasped in relief. "Thank you," the elderly woman wheezed, tears in her eyes. "You saved my life." Nearby, a young single mother was struggling with 2 crying toddlers while trying to eat her meal. The other diners were shooting annoyed glances their way, and the woman looked mortified. Gabrielle approached with a warm smile. "Would you like me to help?" she asked, and without waiting for an answer, she began making funny faces at the children, who immediately stopped crying and began giggling. She spent a few minutes entertaining them while their mother ate in peace for the first time all evening. Preston watched these acts of kindness with growing irritation. "Are you kidding me? Now she's putting on a show trying to make us look bad. Security, get her out of here before she causes more of a scene." Gabrielle finally reached the exit, but before leaving, she turned back to address the room. Her voice was quiet, but it carried clearly in the sudden silence. "I hope you all enjoy your evening," she said simply, "and I hope you never have to experience what it feels like to be judged solely by your appearance." She walked out into the rain, leaving behind a room full of people who were already posting their videos online with captions like, "Entitled woman gets what she deserves," and "Some people need to know their place." Outside, Gabrielle stood under the restaurant's awning and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number she knew by heart. "Hello, Margaret. It's me. I need you to come to Le Chateau immediately. And bring the Whitmore Industries file, all of it. Yes, I know what time it is. This is important." 20 minutes later, a black sedan pulled up to the curb, and an impeccably dressed woman in her 50s stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. Margaret Chen had been Gabrielle's executive assistant for 8 years, and she had seen her boss face discrimination before, but never quite like this. "How bad was it?" Margaret asked quietly as they stood outside the restaurant. Gabrielle's jaw tightened slightly. "Bad enough. Are the documents ready?" "Everything you requested. The property deeds, the corporate structure, the employee contracts, and the Whitmore file. I also took the liberty of calling our legal department." Through the restaurant's windows, they could see that Preston was holding court, probably regaling his table with embellished stories about the encounter. Other diners were still showing each other their phone recordings, laughing at what they saw as the evening's entertainment. "It's time they learned who they were really dealing with," Gabrielle said quietly. They walked back through the front doors, and immediately the maitre d' bristled. "I thought we made it clear that you're not welcome here." Margaret stepped forward, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm Margaret Chen, representing Thompson Industries. We need to speak with Mr. Philippe immediately regarding a matter of urgent business importance." Philippe emerged from the back, looking annoyed. "Look, if this is about filing some kind of complaint, it's about ownership," Margaret said simply, handing him a folder. "Specifically about who owns this restaurant, this building, and the entire chain." Philippe's face went white as he opened the folder and began reading. His hands started to shake as he flipped through page after page of legal documents, property deeds, and corporate filings. This can't be right," he stammered. "What can't be right?" Preston called from his table, sensing that the entertainment wasn't over yet. Philippe looked up, his face ashen. "This woman, she owns Le Chateau, she owns the entire chain, she owns this building." The restaurant fell completely silent. Preston's fork clattered to his plate. Gabrielle stepped forward, and this time when she spoke, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had built an empire from nothing. "My name is Gabrielle Thompson," she said, her words carrying clearly through the hushed dining room. "I am the founder and CEO of Thompson Industries, and yes, I own this restaurant, this building, and 17 other properties in this city. I also own the office building where Mr. Whitmore's real estate firm leases space on the 14th floor." Preston's face had gone from smug confidence to absolute horror. Every cruel word he had spoken was now crashing down on him like an avalanche. Gabrielle continued, her tone measured but firm. "I visit my establishments regularly, often without announcing myself, because I believe the true measure of a business is how it treats people when the owner isn't watching. Today I discovered that this restaurant has been failing that test spectacularly." She turned to address the room. "I built my company from the ground up, starting as a server in a restaurant not unlike this one. I know what it feels like to be dismissed, to be judged, to be treated as less than human because of how I look or where I come from. I never forgot those experiences, and they shaped how I chose to run my businesses." The elderly woman whom Gabrielle had saved from choking stood up suddenly. "I know who you are now," she said in a clear voice. "You're the woman who's been anonymously funding scholarship programs for hospitality workers. I'm Eleanor Richmond from the Times food section. I've been trying to get an interview with you for years." A ripple of recognition went through the crowd. Eleanor Richmond was one of the most respected food critics in the city. Her reviews could make or break a restaurant. Gabrielle nodded to Eleanor with genuine warmth. "It's nice to finally meet you properly, Miss Richmond." She turned back to Philippe and the maitre d'. "You're both terminated, effective immediately. Your behavior tonight was not only disgraceful but completely contrary to the values this company was built on." Then she looked at Jamal, who had been watching from the kitchen doors with amazement. "Jamal, isn't it? I'd like to offer you the position of assistant manager with immediate effect and a significant salary increase. I was impressed by your professionalism and dignity tonight." The young man's mouth fell open. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." Finally, Gabrielle turned to Preston, whose face had gone from red to gray. "As for you, Mr. Whitmore, I'll be reviewing your lease agreement. I believe there's a clause about tenants conducting themselves in a manner that reflects well on the building's reputation. We'll be in touch." Preston opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The man who had been so confident and cruel just minutes ago now looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Gabrielle addressed the other diners, many of whom were frantically trying to delete their social media posts. "I hope this evening has been educational for everyone. Respect isn't something you give based on someone's appearance or perceived social status. Respect is something you give because every human being deserves it." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This restaurant will be closing temporarily for retraining of all staff. When we reopen, it will be with a new management team and a new philosophy that every guest who walks through these doors, regardless of how they're dressed or where they come from, will be treated with dignity and respect." As Gabrielle prepared to leave, Eleanor Richmond approached her. Miss Thompson, I wonder if you might consider that interview now. I think the city needs to hear your story. Gabrielle smiled, the first genuine smile she had shown all evening. I'd like that very much, Miss Richmond. But first, I have a scholarship fund to announce. 6 months later, Le Chateau had reopened to rave reviews. Under Jamal's management, it had become known not just for its excellent food, but for its welcoming atmosphere and exceptional service to all guests. The restaurant's transformation had been featured in magazines nationwide as an example of how businesses could change their culture for the better. Preston Whitmore's real estate firm had quietly moved to a different building after his lease wasn't renewed. His reputation in the city's business community never fully recovered from the viral videos of his behavior that night. Gabrielle had used the incident as a launching point for a broader conversation about respect and dignity in the service industry. Her scholarship fund had grown to support hundreds of young people from underrepresented communities who wanted to pursue careers in hospitality. The evening that had started with humiliation had become a catalyst for positive change, not just in one restaurant, but across an entire industry. And it all began with one woman's decision to respond to cruelty with grace, to meet hatred with kindness, and to use her success not for revenge, but for lifting others up. As Gabrielle often said in the interviews that followed, success isn't about proving you belong, it's about creating spaces where everyone belongs, and sometimes the person you underestimate today might be the person who determines your tomorrow. The lesson was simple but profound. Never judge someone by their appearance, because you never know who you're really talking to. Respect costs nothing, but its absence can cost you everything. And in a world that often seems divided by differences, the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest changes of all.